The thing that strikes me the most about Labatut as a writer, as the person who presides over the total craft, the total end product of these books, is that somehow he avoids the dry loquacity of the historian, the genealogical digressiveness of the biographer, and the unintentional obfuscation of the expert mathematician, while yet still performing all of those roles under the stage direction of the novelist at the helm. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching Leaf by Leaf today. I'm very excited because I get to talk about two books that I just read. Well, I just devoured them, really, just lapped them up. I could not put them down. I picked up When We Cease to Understand the World by Benjamín Labatut on a Sunday afternoon, last Sunday, and I could not put it down. I had to force myself to put it down when I got to the last section and kind of realized the shift in register he was going for. And even though that last section was only like 8 to 10 pages, I wanted to hold off. I wanted to kind of live suspended in the spell that the book had cast on me. And so I actually saved it for the next day and then read that last little section twice, and the book just blew me away. It's a shorter book, When We Cease to Understand the World by NYRB. And then I immediately read his latest book, and actually his English language debut, The MANIAC. And it's a continuation and really the apotheosis of what Labatut does in When We Cease to Understand the World. So I'm very excited to talk about these two books today. But first, I have two announcements. One, I actually started a Discord. People have been asking me to do this for years now. And finally, I decided to listen, and I started one, and I seeded it out there on Instagram. So already got a good little crowd on there, and I'm trying to create a bunch of different channels. So if there are other channels that you would like me to create on there, just let me know. The link to the Discord server is in the description of this video, and I'll put it in other places too. So, feel free to join in. I'm not sure how much I'll be able to interact with it given time constraints, but I am keeping an eye on it and dipping in here and there. I've created some pretty cool channels such as book recommendations, music recommendations, film recommendations. So, this is supposed to be a community of like-minded people who are attracted to the types of literature that I'm attracted to, and thus have, become part of this channel. I've also got channels for language learners, for forthcoming books, which I'm really excited about. This is where we can keep each other informed about books that are coming up so we can lock in our pre-orders. I've got a channel where you can post your library picks, your book haul picks. And I've also got a channel called Requests for Chris, where you can ask me questions or request things, request videos, whatever. So yeah, I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that you all find this something engaging and fruitful. And again, let me know if there are other channels I can add or other ways that I can improve it, because Discord is very new to me. The other announcement is that this year's Leaf by Leaf subscriber wildcard pick has been selected, thanks to my wife and my daughter for helping in the selection from the randomized numbers. And it is Satri by Cormac McCarthy. And I'm thrilled about this. I didn't plan on reading McCarthy at all this year, but oh man, if there could be one book, Blood Meridian, of course, is the obvious choice, but Satri it's something else. And it's a lot of fun. It's profound. The way that I've stated it to people is that Blood Meridian is probably his most important book, but I think that Satri might be his best book. All right, that's it for announcements. Let's jump into Benjamín Labatut. When We Cease to Understand the World, we'll talk about that one first, then we'll talk about The MANIAC. I will say that pretty much everything I could say about one book applies equally to the other. They've got common subject matter. They're written in a common mode, but they do have differences. So here we go. First and foremost, the thing that jumped out at me about Labatut, and I knew nothing about him, and I still know next to nothing about him. One of the good people on the Discord server sent me a LitHub article, which is actually written by Adam Dalva, who I have to say, I'm a little envious of Dalva. I admire him. I have nothing against him, but and I don't even know him. He doesn't know me. But there's something about him that triggers my envy. And I think what it is that for his day job, he's pretty much getting to do what I wish I was able to do instead of working with computers full time. But I did now skim this article that he wrote, and it's basically an anti-profile of Benjamín Labatut because Labatut does not wish to be profiled. And I skimmed over it because I didn't want things to influence this video. And I did see some funny stuff, like Labatut said that he doesn't want to be interviewed because he doesn't have any concrete beliefs or something like that, or he doesn't believe in anything concretely. And a couple of other things he said that strike me as really funny. And then the very last thing is something about, like, he said that it's a shame that he won't let people like Dalva profile him because he's actually a very, very interesting. But he's one of those kind of like Gaddis, Pinchon. He wants the work to be what's in focus, not him. And so I'm going to go back and read that article because it seemed like a lot of fun after I'm finished with this video. But I did see that he is a journalist. And so that confirmed something that, was very apparent as soon as I started to read When We Cease to Understand the World. I thought this guy has to be trained in journalism because he has that journalist's knack for the hook. He has that journalist's intuition for a great story, a great hook. But he also has a novelist's eye for the perfect details. Listen to this early on in the book. Decades before, Zyklon A, a precursor to the poison employed by the Nazis in their concentration camps, had been sprayed on California oranges as a pesticide and used to delouse the trains in which tens of thousands of Mexican immigrants hid when entering the United States. The wood of the train cars was stained a beautiful blue, the same color that can be seen even today on certain bricks at Auschwitz. Both hearken to cyanide's authentic origins as a byproduct isolated in 1782 from the first modern synthetic pigment, Prussian blue, which is also the title of the first section of this book. Or listen to this. His opening paragraphs are outstanding. On the morning of August 31st, 2012, the Japanese mathematician Shinichi Mochizuki published 4 articles on his blog. Those 600 pages contained a proof of one of the most important conjectures in number theory, known as A plus B equals C. To this day, no one has managed to comprehend it. And this is just, I think this is just a shining example of that journalistic form. And it actually, because of its subject matter being so much about math, it reminds me a lot of the essays of Jim Holt that are collected in this wonderful book that I've talked about several times on the channel called When Goethe Walked with Einstein. And it's a collection of Jim Holt's essays on math. Wonderful. This book is both a paean to great scientists and a lamentation for the mass destruction resulting from the way in which such brilliant minds and brilliant discoveries have been put to use. For example, Alexander Grothendieck. His was the power of unbridled abstraction. He championed an approach that was based on wild generalizations, zooming further and further out and then focusing sharply, as any dilemma became clear when one viewed it from a sufficient distance. Numbers, angles, curves, and equations did not interest him, nor did any other mathematical object in particular. All that he cared for was the relationship between them. He had an extraordinary sensitivity to the harmony of things, one of his disciples, Luc et Lucie, recalled, not only did he introduce new techniques and prove major theorems, he changed the way we think about mathematics. So again, that paean to great minds of science. But then, the atoms that tore Hiroshima and Nagasaki apart were split not by the greasy fingers of a general, but by a group of physicists armed with a fistful of equations. Grothendieck could not stop fretting over the possible effects that his own ideas could have on the world. And so, very much just like what we saw in Oppenheimer. And if you loved Oppenheimer, you'll love Benjamín Labatut's books. But just as we saw there, we are considering the culpability of these scientists who are attracted by the cutting edge science. But then that flip side is the way it'll be put to use. Again, with Heisenberg, none of them would dare to do what he had achieved in the midst of his torments in Heligoland. Not merely to calculate, but to think in a quantum manner. And Labatut, by the way, in this book, the whole scene that he's talking about here with Heisenberg going so deeply into trying to think in a quantum manner is rendered unbelievably. This is where the journalist kind of merges and gives way to the novelist. But then on the other side with Heisenberg, it doesn't matter how many people have died or how many have been saved, Professor. Today, all of us are victims. And so all throughout both of these books, he's constantly setting up these dialectics of, like I said, the paean to great scientists, but the lamentation for the outcome of their brilliant discoveries. It's honestly, all throughout both these books, you are intrigued and horrified at the same time. Kind of like the feeling I got when I watched Netflix's biopic on Dahmer. So an example of that tension of intrigue and horror. A section of the Hitler Youth composed of children under 10 handed out cyanide capsules in small wicker baskets, like votive offerings at Mass. Goering, Goebbels, Bormann, and Himmler used these capsules to commit suicide. Hitler, though, became so convinced that his dosage had been tampered with that he chose to test its effectiveness on his beloved Blondie, a German shepherd that had accompanied him to the Führerbunker. The Führer preferred killing his pet to letting her fall into the hands of Russian troops who had already surrounded Berlin and were inching closer to his subterranean refuge by the minute. But he was too cowardly to do it himself. He asked his personal doctor to break one of the capsules in the animal's mouth. The dog, who had just given birth to 4 puppies, died instantly when the minuscule cyanide molecule, formed by one atom of nitrogen, one of carbon, and one of potassium, entered her bloodstream and cut off her breath. The effects of cyanide are so swift that there is but one historical account of its flavor, left behind in the early 21st century by M.P. Prasad, an Indian goldsmith, 32 years old, who managed to write 3 lines after swallowing it. Doctors, potassium cyanide. I have tasted it. It burns the tongue and tastes acrid, said the note found next to his body in the hotel room he had rented for the purpose of taking his own life. So again, I hope you can get from that how the novelist and the journalist works together to keep you intrigued and horrified. It's really something. It is a highly creative, chilling, compelling, and actually accessible blend of history, science, and biography. In fact, when I was talking about these books to a colleague of mine, he said, I'm not smart enough to read books about math and science. And I had to make clear, no, this is made extremely accessible. What Stephen Hawking does for physics, or the Italian Stephen Hawking, Carlo Rovelli, does for physics, Labatut does for math, but somehow in an even more engaging and accessible way. Here's an example of that blend of him dipping into all of those different fields and disciplines at once. The Haber-Bosch process is the most important chemical discovery of the 20th century. By doubling the amount of disposable nitrogen, it provoked the demographic explosion that took the human population from 1.6 to 7 billion in fewer than 100 years. Today, nearly 50% of the nitrogen atoms in our bodies are artificially created. And more than half the world population depends on foodstuffs, fertilized thanks to Haber's invention. The modern world could not exist without the man who pulled bread from the air, in the words of the press today, though the immediate aim of his miraculous discovery was not to feed the hungry masses, but to provide Germany with the raw materials required to continue manufacturing gunpowder and explosives during the First World War, once the English fleet had blocked its access to Chilean nitrate. So again, I could just read this kind of stuff day in and day out. It's so fascinating. But besides just this pulling together of really fascinating trivia and making it highly relevant, such as, that hook about how most of the nitrogen in our bodies is artificially made. That really, turned my head a bit. He also tickles our fascination with genius and its otherness, which he will bring to its apex in The Maniac with John von Neumann. But not just its otherness, also genius and its proximity to madness. The singularity sent forth no warnings. The point of no return, the limit past which one fell prey to its unforgiving pull, had no sign or demarcation. Whoever crossed it was beyond hope. Their destiny was set, as all possible trajectories led irrevocably to the singularity. And if such was the nature of that threshold, Schwarzschild asked, his eyes shot through with blood, how would we know if we had already crossed it? This is Heisenberg and Niels Bohr. They left the park and plunged into the city streets while they discussed the consequences of Heisenberg's discovery, which Bohr saw as the cornerstone upon which a truly new physics could be founded. In philosophical terms, he told him as he took his arm, this was the end of determinism. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle shredded the hopes of all those who had put their faith in the clockwork universe Newtonian physics had promised. According to the determinists, if one could reveal the laws that governed matter, one could reach back to the most archaic past and predict the most distant future. If everything that occurred was the direct consequence of a prior state, then merely by looking at the present and running the equations, it would be possible to achieve a godlike knowledge of the universe. Those hopes were shattered in light of Heisenberg's discovery. What was beyond our grasp was neither the future nor the past, but the present itself. Not even the state of one miserable particle could be perfectly apprehended. However much we scrutinized the fundamentals, there would always be something vague, undetermined, uncertain, as if reality allowed us to perceive the world with crystalline clarity, with one eye at a time, but never both. That was the ingenious thing about Schrödinger's equation. Somehow it managed to thread together the infinite destinies of a particle, all its states, all its trajectories, in a single schema, the wave function, showing them all superimposed. Where before there had been a cause for every effect, now there was a spectrum of probabilities. In the deepest substrate of all things, physics had not found the solid, unassailable reality Schrödinger and Heisenberg had dreamt of, ruled over by a rational God pulling the threads of the world, but a domain of wonders and rarities, born of the whims of a many-armed goddess toying with chance. So as you can see, Labatut can write as well. And as he says in his acknowledgments in this book and The Maniac, this is a blend of fact and fiction. The majority of it is based on fact, but he takes liberties, and he'll spell out where some of those liberties are. But the thing that's so apparent and so enjoyable is that Labatut knows his subject matter so well that he can effortlessly stitch together fact and fiction without any seams showing. In fact, it wasn't until I read in the acknowledgments that the case of Shinichi Mochizuki, one of the protagonists of The Heart of the Heart, the title of one of the pieces in here, is a peculiar one. I did take inspiration from certain aspects of his work to enter into the mind of Alexander Grothendieck. But most of what is said here about him, his biography, and his research is fiction. I never would have known because of how deftly it's painted in here. In the end, this book really made me question just how opposed the two predominant philosophies of history are, those being the zeitgeist of Hegel and the great man theory of Carlyle. Given the way that Labatut lays out the evidence and the story of what has happened in science over the last couple of centuries, it has really challenged my views of history. He really paints a dramatic, striking story with this thread running through all of scientific discovery and its massive effect on humankind. But then the book culminates in this frenetic, epic saga between Heisenberg and Schrödinger, and then lands with a chilling summary statement. It was mathematics, not nuclear weapons, computers, biological warfare, or our climate Armageddon, which was changing our world to the point where, in a couple of decades at most, we would simply not be able to grasp what being human really meant. And this is something that will continue into the MANIAC and culminate in Lee Sedol to an amazing and profound impact. And then, like I said, the last section of the book sort of swerves away from the journalistic, essayistic mode and enters into the poetic. Switching to the first person, things become more personal, more intimate, more immediate. The prose begins to read as if this is a mythology about a world that seems familiar but is slipping through the fingers of our understanding. And then the final line offers this aphoristic paradox about lemon trees that echoes Schrödinger's cat. I asked him how long my own citrus had to live. He told me that there was no way to know, at least not without cutting it down and looking inside its trunk. But really, who would want to do that? So that's the NYRB, When We Cease to Understand the World. And now we're going to move to the Penguin Press English debut of Benjamín Labatut, The Maniac. And The Maniac, there's a double entendre there. Maniac is the name of the computer that von Neumann created, but of course it's also, talking about maniacs, meaning these mad scientists. But again, I think that The Maniac for me was the apotheosis of what Labatut started in When We Cease to Understand the World, which is just a hard-hitting, beautifully wrought, designed to maximal effect powerhouse of a little book. But then The Maniac is just that as a mature adult, I guess I could say. And with The Maniac, it came to my mind that what Benjamín Labatut has created with these two books is a genre that I can only think of as the biographical thriller, a sort of subgenre to creative nonfiction. I don't know if that's an original thought or not, but biographical thriller is what we have here, and it is incredible. In some ways, Labatut has recalled to me the work of Pierre Sange and what he does for Lichtenberg, and Matthias Énard, what he does for Michelangelo and other figures. And the crazy thing is that I feel serendipitously primed for The Maniac. I didn't even know I was going to get around to reading it this soon. And it just so happened that, of course, Oppenheimer came out last year, but over Christmas break, for whatever reason, YouTube served up the AlphaGo documentary as something I'd be interested in. And I remember hearing about AlphaGo and hearing about DeepMind and Google buying them and some crazy things that they were doing that went beyond what IBM did with Deep Blue. I just remember hearing these things over the years, but I never did watch the documentary. And then it's an amazing documentary, by the way. And then to my surprise, that would be a major source of the third part of the MANIAC. This one takes the form of an oral biography. And so it's stitched together from the perspective of family and friends and enemies and colleagues of the great Hungarian polymath John von Neumann. This allows Labatut to show that not only is he incredibly gifted as a journalist, as a thinker, as a novelist, but now he's showing that he can enter the mind of seemingly any personage and take on their thoughts and the registers of their speech. One that really stood out to me is Richard Feynman, for example. It's just amazing how he's able to modulate all these different voices and perspectives. And from all that, we get this portrait of the ultimate genius, the ultimate mathematician, scientist, thinker, logician, however you want to think about it. Just a person whose mind works so differently from the common person that it's just this complete enigma. And to be honest with you, though I know more about the contributions of Alan Turing and Charles Babbage to computers and programming, I knew a lot less about von Neumann. And by the end of reading The Maniac, I feel a little bit dumb about that because of just how much of an influence on computer science and AI von Neumann had. The different voices tell us his mind was in a state of constant hunger. The thing about my husband that people don't understand is that he truly saw life as a game. He regarded all human endeavors, no matter how deadly or serious, in that spirit. He once told me that, just as wild animals play when they are young in preparation for lethal circumstances arising later in their lives, mathematics may be, to a large extent, nothing but a strange and wonderful collection of games, an enterprise whose real purpose, beyond any one stated outright, is to slowly work changes in the individual and collective human psyche as a way to prepare us for a future that nobody can imagine. Wow. I have always resisted condemning Yancey, and this is like a nickname that his friend and colleague Eugene Wigner refers to him by. And I have no clue if I'm pronouncing that correctly, so I apologize. I have always resisted condemning Yancey or judging him too harshly because I believe that a mind like his, one of inexorable logic, must have made him understand and accept many things that most of us do not even want to acknowledge and cannot begin to comprehend. He did not see the way the rest of us do, and this colored many of his moral judgments. With his theory of games and economic behavior, for example, he wasn't trying to fight a war or beat the casino or finally win a game of poker. He was aiming at nothing less than the complete mathematicization of human motivation. He was trying to capture some part of mankind's soul with mathematics. And I think that to a large extent, he succeeded in setting down the rules by which people make choices, economic and otherwise. And again, from Wigner, Yancey thought that if our species was to survive the 20th century, we needed to fill the void left by the departure of the gods. And the one and only candidate that could achieve this strange, esoteric transformation was technology. Our ever-expanding technical knowledge was the only thing that separated us from our forefathers, since in morals, philosophy, and general thought, we were no better. Indeed, we were much, much worse than the Greeks, the Vedic people, or the small nomadic tribes that still clung to nature as the sole grantor of grace and the true measure of existence. The thing that strikes me the most about Labatut as a writer, as the person who presides over the total craft, the total end product of these books, is that somehow he avoids the dry loquacity of the historian, the genealogical digressiveness of the biographer, and the unintentional obfuscation of the expert mathematician, while yet still performing all of those roles under the stage direction of the novelist at the helm. For example, absolutist and extreme, Hilbert's program was really a symptom of its time, a desperate attempt to find security in a world that was spinning out of control. It took shape during an era of maximal change. Fascism was emerging all around us. Quantum mechanics was unsettling our ideas about how matter behaved inside atoms. And Einstein's theories were revolutionizing our concepts of space and time. But what Hilbert, von Neumann, and many others like them were after was perhaps even more primordial. Because then as now, an ever-growing proportion of knowledge and technology rested on the exactitude and sanctity of the queen of the natural sciences. What else can we put our trust in? There are as many gods as there are people who believe in them, and the so-called human sciences are no better than philosophy, just mindless games played with meaningless words. Mathematics is different. And so yes, just like in When We Cease to Understand the World, the MANIAC continues this preoccupation with noting the centrality and the impact of mathematics on humankind. I failed him miserably in what is most important. I was unable to communicate the sanctity, the holiness of our discipline. This is one of von Neumann's teachers. I did not teach him what the pure in pure mathematics really means. It is not what people think. It is not a knowledge for its own sake. It is not a search for patterns, nor is it a series of abstract intellectual games completely unconnected from the real world and its many troubles. It is something quite other. Mathematics is the closest we can come to the mind of Hashem, or God. And so it should be practiced with reverence because it has true power, a power that can be easily used for evil, as it is born from the faculty that only we possess, and that the Lord, blessed be He, gave us instead of teeth, claws, or talons, but that is equally dangerous and lethal. When you combined Gödel's and von Neumann's ideas, the outcome defied logic itself. From here to eternity, mathematicians would have to choose between accepting terrible paradoxes and contradictions, or work with unverifiable truths. And that's just one of a slew of Labatut's great summary statements where, and it's just that journalist in him combined with the novelists, and where he creates these unbelievable hooks where now you have to read so that you can see how he supports this hook, this claim he's just made. And then you're just dazzled by all of the evidence and the way he produces it. And then he lands with such gracefulness on these summary statements that just tie it all together. We cannot deny that we are inching toward a moment in history when our relationship with technology will be fundamentally altered. As the creatures of our imagination slowly begin to take real form, and we are faced with the responsibility to not only create, but also care for them. And again, the novelist in him now adds even more cinematic flair than even what we got in great passages of When We Cease to Understand the World, such as this one, the ominous mushroom cloud hanging over us, with all the radioactivity glowing purplish and alien inside it, rising higher and higher into the stratosphere, while the terrifying thunder from the blast kept echoing back and forth, over and over again, bouncing along the mountains like a bell tolling for the end of the world. And then with the detonation of a hydrogen bomb, it was housed in a hangar built on the island of Elugalab, which was instantly vaporized by the explosion. The island, disappeared completely, erased from the earth along with 80 million tons of coral, replaced by a crater 17 stories deep. That flash was followed by a tremendous fireball that appeared on the horizon like a sun when half risen. It quickly expanded into an enormous mushroom-shaped cloud that rose toward the stratosphere and continued to grow until it was 5 times taller than Mount Everest. The size of the cloud was incomparably larger than the one I saw in the desert from the atom bomb. Onlookers who were 30 miles away from the vaporized island shivered as it began to loom above their heads, balanced on a wide, dirty stem made of coral particles, debris, and water vapor. As it expanded, the fireball reached a temperature of 300 million degrees, hotter than the core of the sun. It looked almost alive, bubbling and folding in on itself like marmalade churning in a pot, with great black lumps floating amid its gorged mass. The sky turned as red as a furnace. One of the pilots circling overhead wrote that it looked as if the atmosphere itself was boiling. Huge clouds formed in the sky, followed by a strange darkness that rushed toward the horizon, chasing a sound wave so intense that it lasted for minutes as the sonic boom bounced between the stratosphere and the ocean. You can not only see, but feel and hear, smell, and even taste this prose. Again, he continues with those hooks and that fascination with the mind of genius and historically momentous times. When future historians look back at our time and try to pin down the first glimmer of true artificial intelligence, they may well find it in a single move during the second game between Lee Sedol and AlphaGo, played on the 10th of March, 2016. Move 37. And Labatut will go on to beautifully describe what he's talking about here. And even though I had seen the documentary before reading this book, somehow the book made the documentary even better, or what's captured in the documentary even more fascinating and moving. Or here he is talking about Georg Cantor, who I read, and I think I even recommended this book. I'm trying to think of what it's called. The Mystery of the Aleph, I think. I think the Amir Axel, Axel is the writer, and I think it's called The Mystery of the Aleph. But it's about Cantor and his discoveries in infinity and how he's just going mad over and over, but he made monumental discoveries that there's not just one type of infinity. But here's Labatut on Cantor. Trying to silence his opponents by making his theory complete, Cantor developed an entire hierarchy of infinities, but he struggled with increasingly strong episodes of unavoidable, uncontrollable mania, attacks that were followed by deep melancholy and the darkest possible depression. These spells became so regular that he was unable to work on mathematics. As a substitute, he devoted his boundless manic energy to trying to prove that Shakespeare's plays had actually been written by the English philosopher Francis Bacon, and that Christ was the natural son of Joseph of Arimathea. Views that only helped to give more credence to the arguments of those that said that he was slowly going insane. I, for one, will never cease being fascinated with the proximity of deep mathematics and madness, almost as if it's a martyrdom or a bargain with Mephistopheles, a Faustian bargain, that you have to trade your sanity for certain insights or at a certain level in mathematical thinking. And Labatut really has an eye, like I've been saying over and over with the hook and the summary statement, but to seed in these ideas and then to capitalize on them, for lack of a better word, later to great effect. For example, this is Eugene Wigner, again, quoting from a letter that von Neumann wrote him. How could machines start to have a life of their own? I can formulate the problem rigorously in the same way in which Turing did for his mechanisms. Yancey wrote me just a couple of months before he died. He purported to have already set down a scheme that seemed to prove that there exists a type of automaton We may call it Aleph 0, which has the following property. If you provide Aleph 0 with a description of anything, it consumes it and produces 2 copies of the description. And that is seeded to us roughly 100 pages from the end. And then at the very end, we get this. For all these games, it, meaning an AI, it considered no human experience. It was simply given the rules and allowed to play against itself. At first, it made completely random moves, but in next to no time, it had evolved into an unbeatable force. It has now become the strongest entity the world has ever known at Go, chess, and shogi. Its name is Alpha 0. So whereas von Neumann used the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, the team from Google, or that Google bought, called it Alpha, using the Greek, Alpha 0. But I actually didn't even know about that. Somehow I knew about AlphaGo, but I didn't know about Alpha 0 and how the way that they created it, in contrast to AlphaGo, which they fed tons of games that have been played from amateurs to grandmasters. With Alpha 0, they just fed it instructions and let it learn against itself. So, like they said, it didn't learn based on any human knowledge or human play at all, which is just wow. And it quickly threw aside Stockfish, which was the strongest chess AI. The Maniac recalled parts of reading Stella Maris last year from Cormac McCarthy. It recalled the whole mathematical element of Against the Day that I just recently read. Again, the essays of Jim Holt. I have to say, too, that in The Maniac, unlike When We Cease to Understand the World, there are these single sentence pages that are used to amazing effect. And I won't even try to deliver it over this video. It's something that's visible. It has to be seen and heard. And even an audiobook won't be able to capture this. I mean, a nice pause will kind of do it, but seeing the single brief sentence with all the white space around it will make it even more chilling. And I would say the best one in The Maniac is the one that's used heading into the third section on Lee Sedol. By the time I got done reading both of these books, I thought to myself, you know that a writer has found their secret sauce, as I've heard it referred to, when you as a reader find yourself thinking, like making this wish list of all the things, all the subjects, all the historical events, all the people that you would love for this writer to focus their powers on. Like, I immediately thought, oh my goodness, I hope that eventually we get a book from Benjamín Labatut on Nikola Tesla. So to wrap up, how to even describe in brief what Benjamín Labatut has created with these 2 phenomenal books. I have never been more intrigued by mathematics in my life, yet also never been more horrified at its real effects and paradigm shifts on our species, on our culture, that it really is having when you consider AlphaGo to Alpha 0, with not that much space, not that much time elapsed in between these 2 AI entities. And just thinking about where machine learning and neural networks have taken us in a relatively very brief time. I would say that if you're interested in these types of topics, but you don't really understand them at all, you don't really have the capacity to understand them, but you love to read and you love literature and you love people who are in great command of the craft of writing, the design of a book, then these 2 books by Benjamín Labatut are definitely for you. I seriously cannot wait to see what he does next. And I can guarantee you that at this point, as soon as a book by Labatut comes out, I will be putting life on hold to steal myself away and cut myself off from the rest of humanity and lap up every sentence.